The dry wind swept across the New Mexico mesas, carrying dust and the scent of sagebrush over miles of empty land. Jeremiah Cole had lived alone on the outskirts of the small settlement of Red Rock for nearly 20 years. He had built a life around solitude, hard work, and the rhythm of the seasons, and over time he had learned to avoid entanglements with other people. Women had tried over the years to tempt him into company and conversation, into marriage, into a life that wasn't defined by freedom and the silence of the open land. But Jeremiah had always turned them down, not because he lacked charm. On the contrary, the men of the town often whispered about his good looks and quiet strength, but because he valued solitude above all else. His cabin stood alone on a high ridge, a simple wooden structure with a stone fireplace and a small corral. Beyond that, there was only desert, rock formations, and the wind that never truly stopped. That morning, Jeremiah woke to the smell of smoke curling from the fireplace where he had left the embers smoldering overnight. He dressed quickly, tying his boots and adjusting his worn hat, and stepped outside. The rising sun caught the edges of the distant cliffs, turning them golden, and the wind tugged at the loose folds of his coat. He intended to ride to the water tank that morning, check the fences, and move cattle. Routine, life he understood and controlled. But there was something different in the air that day. As he approached the corral, he saw a figure moving along the ridge. A woman, not a townsperson he recognized, not a neighbor. She walked with a certain quiet confidence, though the wind whipped at her hair and coat, carrying her closer toward the cabin. Jeremiah watched from a distance, hand on the butt of his rifle, curiosity pricking at him. She approached slowly, steps deliberate but unhurried. Her dark hair fell around her shoulders, and her eyes, sharp and steady, scanned the cabin as if weighing it and its owner in a single glance. Jeremiah felt a strange tension in his chest, a flutter he hadn't felt in years. The woman stopped at the base of the ridge and called out, her voice carrying over the wind. "You Jeremiah Cole?" she asked. He nodded once, cautious. "I'm Sara," she said. "I'm looking for shelter for the night." Her tone wasn't timid. It carried strength and quiet command. Jeremiah tilted his head, measuring her. Shelter. That was simple. He gestured toward the cabin. "You can stay," he said, voice low and steady. She smiled faintly and walked toward him. Her boots crunched against the gravel, snow-dusted in patches, though it was early winter. Once inside, she shed her coat, revealing a simple dress dusted with travel and wind. Jeremiah noted that she carried herself with the same careful precision he used in his own work. There was a history in her eyes, a story he could not yet read. Over the fire that evening, Jeremiah tended the small flames, and Sara prepared a humble meal from the provisions she carried. They spoke little, sharing the silence that comes from two people who understand hardship, and yet, every so often, she glanced at him with an intensity that made his jaw tighten. Finally, after the meal, she looked at him directly. "You don't take women, do you?" she asked quietly. Jeremiah's lips pressed into a thin line. "I've turned down everyone who asked," he said. She studied him carefully, as though reading the contours of his past through the firelight. "And yet, you keep this cabin, this land. You survive. You live well enough. But do you want a wife, or just shelter?" The question hung in the air like smoke curling upward from the fireplace. Jeremiah's fingers tightened on the chair's armrest. He had never been asked this directly, never confronted so plainly with the truth of his life. Shelter or a wife? He thought about the years alone, the quiet nights, the empty meals, and the wind against the walls. He thought about the simplicity of solitude, but also about the human need for company, for understanding. Sara's eyes did not waver from his, her question patient but probing. There was no threat in her tone, only honesty. Jeremiah felt a strange warmth creep into his chest. He had expected challenge or defiance. Instead, he felt curiosity and something else, respect. The fire crackled and sparks leapt upward into the dark chimney. Outside, the wind carried on its endless path across the mesa. Jeremiah looked at the woman before him, traveling alone, carrying her own past like the dust that followed the wind. And for the first time in decades, he considered answering a question he had never dared to ask himself. He leaned back slightly, letting the weight of years press into his shoulders, then met her gaze squarely. "Maybe both," he said slowly. Sarah's lips curved into a faint smile, neither triumphant nor mocking, but aware, understanding. And in that moment, the quiet cabin seemed a little warmer, the shadows of the walls less oppressive, the wind outside less relentless. Jeremiah realized that life could be more than survival. Perhaps, just perhaps, there could be company. There could be trust. There could be a partner to share the harsh, unforgiving land. Outside, the sun set behind the cliffs, painting the sky in red and gold. And inside the small cabin, a fragile beginning took shape. And as the fire burned lower that night, Jeremiah understood that his solitary life was about to change, in ways he had not imagined possible. Outside, the wind continued its ceaseless howl, rattling the wooden shutters and tugging at the edges of the cabin's roof. Yet inside, the warmth from the fire and the presence of Sara made the space feel alive for the first time in decades. Jeremiah watched her quietly as she moved about the small cabin, tidying the few belongings she had set aside, adjusting the blankets near the hearth, and preparing a small corner for herself. Her confidence was calm, deliberate, and unassuming, yet it filled the room in a way that he realized he had been missing all these years. The night stretched on, and their conversation grew easier. Sara spoke of her travels, of the harsh winters she had endured alone, of the loss she had survived after her husband's death. Jeremiah listened, occasionally nodding, sometimes asking questions, but mostly absorbing the rhythm of her voice. It was different from anyone he had known. There was resilience, tempered with quiet sorrow, and a depth that made the rough edges of his own solitude feel smaller, less intimidating. He realized that for the first time, he was not thinking about the future in terms of survival alone, but in terms of sharing life, sharing burdens, and perhaps even sharing joy. The days that followed were a test of endurance and partnership. Sara proved herself capable, handling the chores of the cabin and ranch with skill and determination. She mended fences, fed the animals, and even accompanied Jeremiah on rides across the mesas to check on the cattle. The harsh sun, the relentless wind, and the biting cold seemed less daunting with her presence, and Jeremiah began to notice small changes in himself. He laughed more easily, allowed moments of quiet play with the horses, and even found himself sharing meals without the strict ritual he had always adhered to. There was a rhythm to their work together, an unspoken understanding that grew with each shared task and each night spent around the fire. One evening, after a particularly long day tending to a sick calf, Jeremiah and Sara sat on the small porch, watching the sun dip behind the mesas, painting the sky in deep reds and purples. The silence was comfortable, filled with the unspoken acknowledgement of shared labor and shared respect. Sara turned to him and asked quietly, "Do you ever regret it, choosing solitude all these years?" Jeremiah thought for a moment, letting the wind carry the scent of sagebrush to his senses. "Sometimes," he admitted, "but I survived. I kept going, and I learned a lot about myself. But meeting you, I didn't expect this. I didn't expect company or trust or possibility." Sara smiled softly, placing her hand lightly over his. "Possibility is why we keep moving forward," she said. That simple truth settled between them, warm and steady, and Jeremiah felt something shift in his heart. It was no longer just the desire for survival. It was the desire for connection, for trust, for partnership. Winter came hard, with biting cold and deep snow that covered the land in thick white. But the cabin, once silent and empty, now echoed with shared effort, laughter, and quiet conversation. Sara proved to be not only a partner in labor, but a partner in life, learning the ways of the land with him and offering guidance when he faltered. Together they repaired the fences, tended the livestock, and managed the storms that swept across the mesas. And in the evenings, by the glow of the fire, they shared stories, secrets, and dreams that had been buried beneath years of solitude. Months passed, and the bond between them strengthened. Jeremiah noticed how the animals responded to Sara, how her calm presence soothed them and made the work lighter. He noticed how his heart beat differently around her, how the cabin felt alive and warm in ways it never had before. And one night, as the wind howled outside and snow drifted against the shutters, Sara turned to him and said, "You know, you could have said no. You could have sent me away, but you didn't." Jeremiah looked at her, seeing the truth in her eyes. "Because I wanted this," he admitted, his voice low but steady. "I want more than shelter now. I want life. I want company. I want you." She smiled, a soft, knowing smile that spoke of courage, patience, and shared understanding. "Then you have it," she said. And with that, the cabin was no longer just a shelter from the wind and snow. It was a home, a place where two lives, shaped by hardship and solitude, had intertwined to create warmth, companionship, and love. The seasons continued to turn, each bringing its own challenges and triumphs. Together, Jeremiah and Sara faced storms, droughts, and the solitude of the frontier. And yet, they were never alone. The land remained vast and unforgiving, but inside the cabin, and in the quiet moments shared on the porch and in the fields, life had gained something it had lacked for years: shared purpose, trust, and the unspoken promise of each other's presence. And Jeremiah, who had once turned down every woman, realized that the question Sara had asked on that first evening, "You want a wife or just shelter?" was not merely about companionship. It was about the choice to open his life, to accept the warmth of human connection, and to allow himself to be seen, trusted, and loved. The wind howled outside as it always had, but inside the cabin, a fire burned bright, a testament to the courage, patience, and heart of two people who had learned that survival was not enough. Life was meant to be shared. And in that shared life, Jeremiah found a home he had never imagined possible.